if he's about to reveal a secret that could change our understanding of history. Language is the ghost of a civilization. It is the vessel that carries the memory, the culture, and the soul of a people long after their cities have turned to dust. We, the living, are like archaeologists, sifting through the fossilized remains of dead languages, trying to reconstruct the thoughts of our ancestors from these brittle, silent symbols. But we have always worked under one fundamental assumption, that language, once written, is static, that it is a fixed record, a message frozen in time. But what if we were wrong? What if there was a civilization so advanced, so attuned to the subtle rhythms of the universe, that they created a language that was not static, but alive, a language that could change, that could adapt, that could respond to the world around it? What if their ghost was not the spirit of a person, but the living, breathing spirit of the language itself? My name is Carlos Mendoza. The case I am about to present is one that defies the very foundations of modern linguistics. It is the story of a brilliant young academic who was given the key to a lost civilization, only to discover that the lock was not on a door, but on her own perception of reality. She was sent to decipher a dead language. She had no idea that the language itself was going to teach her how to read it. This is the story of the Weaver's Codex and the ghost that haunts the space between the words. Chapter 1. The Unreadable Language. Asterisk, her name is Dr. Elara Vance, and in the rarefied world of paleolinguistics, she is a rock star. She has a unique, almost supernatural talent for finding the hidden patterns, the logical skeletons, within the world's most obscure and forgotten languages. She can look at a 1,000-year-old fragment of text and see not just words, but the ghost of the mind that wrote them. It was this reputation that earned her the academic prize of a lifetime, exclusive first access to the Weaver's Codex. The Codex was an anomaly, an artifact that broke every rule, discovered perfectly preserved in a sealed clay jar in a cave along the ancient Silk Road. It was the only known relic of a civilization known only as the Silken People, a culture that had, according to historical records, simply vanished without a trace around the 5th century. The Codex was a book of about 200 pages, made of a strange, fibrous parchment, and filled with a language that had baffled scholars for a decade. It was not alphabetic, it was not pictographic, it was not syllabic. The symbols were impossibly complex, like a cross between an astronomical chart and a spider's web, and they resisted every known method of decryption. To the world's linguists, it was the Everest of their field. To Elara, it was a challenge she could not resist. The first week of her work was a lesson in pure frustration. The footage from the archive's security cameras shows her in that sterile, silent room, a lone figure wrestling with a ghost of pure information. She used every tool at her disposal. She ran statistical frequency analyses on the symbols. She used AI-powered pattern recognition software. She spent days just staring at the pages, trying to find a foothold, a repeating pattern, a piece of logic she could grasp onto. But there was nothing. The language seemed to defy logic itself. A symbol that appeared on one page would appear on another, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible change, an extra filament here, a slight curve there that seemed to completely alter its context. It was a language without rules, without consistency. It was, for all intents and purposes, unreadable. She was on the verge of admitting defeat, of declaring the Codex to be what many senior academics already believed it was, a hoax, or the work of a madman. On the 5th day of her research, exhausted and disheartened, she was staring at a specific, recurring symbol, a complex, star-like shape with 12 delicate filaments. On one page, she had logged its context as possibly meaning sun. On another, water. On a third, stone. It made no sense. As her frustration peaked, a strange ancillary event occurred. The weather outside the university, which had been a clear, dry autumn day, changed with unnatural speed. Dark, heavy clouds rolled in, and a sudden, intense thunderstorm broke over the city. The archive's advanced climate control system whirred to life, fighting to maintain the room's precise temperature and humidity levels. Elara, distracted by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows, glanced at the digital monitor on the wall that displayed the room's environmental data, and that's when she saw the first clue. Despite the system's best efforts, the humidity in the room had spiked by a single, tiny percentage point. A negligible change. But as she glanced back at the Codex, she felt a jolt, a cognitive shock that made the hair on her arms stand up. The star-like symbol on the page had changed. It was a change so subtle, so microscopic, that she thought she was hallucinating. The 12 filaments of the symbol seemed to have relaxed, unfurled, just barely. The entire geometry of the symbol had shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, yet fundamentally different. It was no longer the symbol she had logged as sun. It now looked slightly, but distinctly, like the one she had logged as water. Her scientific mind raced, trying to form a rational explanation. The parchment, made of some unknown organic fiber, must be hyperhygroscopic, reacting to the minute change in the room's humidity. A fascinating, but ultimately irrelevant, physical quirk of the artifact. But then, a second, more radical, and far more terrifying hypothesis began to form in her mind. A hypothesis that came not from linguistics, but from a place of pure, intuitive dread. What if the change wasn't an accidental property of the parchment? What if the change was the language? What if she was trying to read a static sentence, when she should have been listening to a living conversation? She stared at the Codex, her understanding of language, of history, of reality itself, beginning to fray at the edges. She was alone in a sealed, silent room, with a book that was, by all rational accounts, a dead object. But she knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that it was not. The room was not empty. There was a presence with her, a quiet, ancient, and profoundly intelligent consciousness, bound to the pages of the book. It wasn't a ghost that haunted a place. It was the ghost of a scribe, haunting the very fabric of her own words. And it was using the rain, the air, the very environment of the room, to teach Elara the first rule of its impossible, living language. Chapter 2. The Environmental Dialogue. The line between madness and genius is often a question of proof. For Dr. Elara Vance, the hypothesis that had bloomed in her mind was so radical, so completely outside the bounds of known science and history, that she knew she was standing on that very line. A language that responded to the environment. A text that was not a static record, but a dynamic, environmental interface. It was the stuff of fantasy, but the evidence of her own eyes, the memory of that subtle, impossible shift in the symbol, was a data point she could not ignore. She had to test it. She had to prove herself sane or insane. The archive was a perfect laboratory, a sealed environment where every variable temperature, humidity, light, and sound was meticulously controlled and monitored. If her hypothesis was correct, she should be able to manipulate the language by manipulating the room. It was a terrifying and exhilarating prospect. She was about to attempt to start a conversation with a dead civilization, using the archive's climate control system as her voice. Her first experiment was with temperature. The footage from the archive's cameras shows her approaching the environmental control panel on the wall, her hand hesitating over the thermostat. She later described this moment to me as the most significant of her scientific career. She was consciously choosing to abandon 2,000 years of linguistic theory and step into the unknown. She manually overrode the system, lowering the room's temperature by a single, precise degree Celsius. She returned to the Codex and aimed her digital microscope at a specific line of text. And she watched, her breath caught in her throat, as the impossible happened again. As the temperature in the room fell, the symbols on the page responded. They tightened. The delicate filament-like lines contracted. The geometric shapes became sharper, more crystalline. A symbol that she had previously logged as meaning river in a high humidity context now looked completely different. It had transformed into the symbol she had associated with stone or mountain. It was a perfect, repeatable, scientific observation. The language was not just responding to the environment, it was describing it. It was a living map of its own context. A wave of vertigo washed over her. The genius of this was staggering. This wasn't just writing. It was a form of programmable matter. A language woven from a material that could hold and display multiple states of information. Over the next week, she worked in a state of controlled, feverish discovery, conducting a series of brilliant, careful experiments. She manipulated the humidity and watched the symbols for desert and jungle morph into one another. She introduced low-frequency sound waves into the room, and a whole new set of acoustic signifiers, tiny resonant circles, appeared within the symbols, seemingly describing the very sound she was introducing. She realized she was not just a reader. She was a collaborator, and the ghost of the scribe, the entity she now thought of as Lyra, was her silent partner. The haunting was not in the room, it was in the data. Lyra wasn't a presence that moved objects. She was a presence that subtly influenced the environment to guide Elara's discoveries. A sudden, inexplicable draft that would draw Elara's attention to a specific page. A flicker of the overhead lights that would, for a fraction of a second, reveal a hidden layer of text visible only under a specific light spectrum. Elara began to feel a profound, intellectual intimacy with this ghost. They were two minds, separated by 15 centuries, working together to unlock a shared secret. As she grew more attuned to the languages and the ghost's subtle cues, her progress accelerated. She began to understand the grammar. It was a contextual, relational language. A symbol didn't have a single meaning. It had a core concept, and its precise meaning was defined by its relationship to the environment and the symbols around it. It was a language that could describe not just an object, but the state of that object in a specific moment in time. It was a language that could hold 1,000 different stories on a single page. She began to translate the first, most stable section of the Codex, the introduction. What she uncovered was not just a key to the language, but the heartbreaking story of its creator. The text glowed on her screen, a message sent across 1,500 years of silence. "I am Lyra, the last weaver," the translation read, "and this Codex is the memory of our people. The loom of our world is about to break. A great dissonance is coming, a sound that will shatter the stone and boil the rivers. Our leaders have decreed that we must enter the long silence to sleep in the heart of the earth until the world is quiet again. They have forbidden me from creating this record. They say our knowledge is too dangerous to be left behind, a key that the children of the Dissonance might use for their own destruction. But a memory, once lost, can never be rebuilt. I have disobeyed. I have woven our world into this living page, a language that will only speak its secrets to a mind that is quiet enough to listen to the world around it. If you are reading this, then you are a listener. You have learned the first secret, that the meaning is not in the symbol, but in the space between. Now, I will teach you the second." Elara sat back, stunned. She had just received a direct communication from the ghost, from Lyra. But it was also a warning, a great dissonance, a long silence. And what was the second secret? As she pondered the terrifying implications of the text, a new unforeseen event occurred. An alarm began to blare from the environmental control panel on the wall. A flashing, red light accompanied a piercing electronic screech. A system failure. The Archive's advanced climate control system, which she had been pushing to its limits for a week, had just catastrophically failed. The room's temperature and humidity began to rise rapidly, the digital readouts climbing into the red zone, far outside the parameters that kept the ancient Codex stable. The book, the living language, was now in danger. But as Elara rushed to the panel, She saw the true, horrifying nature of the event. The system hadn't just failed. A message was typed across the error screen, a message that should not have been there. It read, "System override, external access. Someone, somewhere, had just hacked into the university's most secure archive, and they were deliberately, systematically, trying to destroy the only key to a lost civilization." The ghost's warning was no longer a piece of history. It was happening right now. Chapter 3. The Dissonant Frequency. Asterisk, the quiet, academic conversation Elara had been having with a 1500-year-old ghost had just been violently gate-crashed by a 21st century predator. The hacking of the archive's climate control was not a random act of cyber-vandalism. It was a precise, targeted, and utterly ruthless attack. The goal was clear: to rapidly alter the environmental conditions of the room and destroy the delicate, hypersensitive parchment of the Weaver's Codex. Someone knew what she was doing, and they were trying to kill the language before it could speak its most dangerous secrets. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. The footage from the archive cameras shows her in a frantic race against an invisible enemy. She tries to manually shut down the system at the main breaker, but the override is too deep. The hacker has total control. She watches in horror as the humidity level on the monitor climbs past 70%, the danger zone for ancient organic materials. She looks at the codex, and she can see the physical effect. The pages are beginning to warp, the fibers of the parchment visibly swelling, the delicate, web-like symbols blurring and losing their sharp, geometric precision. The ghost's language was dying before her eyes. In a moment of desperate inspiration, she realizes she cannot fight the hacker's control over the room, but she can control the microenvironment around the book. She smashes the emergency glass on a fire extinguisher case, not for the extinguisher, but for the heavy, insulated blanket inside. She carefully opens the pressurized display case, a cacophony of new alarms screaming at her, and gently, reverently, wraps the Weaver's Codex in the thick, protective blanket, shielding it from the rapidly changing atmospheric conditions. She has saved the artifact, for now. But she is now locked in a battle with a faceless enemy who knows her location and the exact nature of her work. The attack lasted for exactly 1 hour. Then the hacker disengaged, and the system returned to normal. But the message had been sent. A warning shot had been fired. Elara knew she was no longer safe in the university. The ghost's secret was so powerful that someone was willing to commit a major federal crime to keep it buried. She was no longer a linguist. She was a liability. She knew she had to get the Codex out. That night, she used her own security clearance to disable the alarms, packed the precious manuscript into a specially designed archival briefcase, and walked out of the university, becoming a fugitive with the world's most valuable and dangerous book in her possession. She retreated to a small isolated cabin she owned in the countryside, a place with no network connection, a place where she could be, for a time, off the grid. It was there, in the quiet solitude of the cabin, surrounded by the natural, uncontrolled environment, that the ghost's communication changed again. It was no longer a gentle guide. It was now a frantic, urgent messenger. As a storm rolled in one night, the humidity and temperature in the cabin fluctuated wildly, and the Codex, which she had open on a table, came alive. The symbols shifted and morphed with a speed she had never seen before, a torrent of information being released by the changing weather. Lyra was taking advantage of the natural environmental chaos to show Elara the Codex's most important chapter, the prophecy of the Great Dissonance. As the storm raged, Elara translated the living words of the ghost. The story that emerged was a terrifying piece of lost science. Lyra's people, the Silken Weavers, had been masters of acoustic physics and geology. They understood the deep, resonant frequencies of the earth itself. The Great Dissonance was not a metaphor. It was a specific, scientific prediction. Lyra wrote of a deep, tectonic fault line that ran beneath their territory, a geological wound that was kept stable by the delicate balance of the region's climate. But she wrote that this balance could be shattered. Her people's scientists had calculated that a specific, sustained, high-frequency sound at dissonant frequency could trigger a resonant cascade in the bedrock, a chain reaction that would lead to a catastrophic, localized earthquake of unimaginable power. Their entire civilization was built on a sonic knife's edge, and the Codex, she now realized, was not just a history book. It was a user's manual for a geological weapon. The final part of the prophecy made her blood run cold. Lyra had written down the exact mathematical formula for the dissonant frequency, and she had, in a passage that seemed to writhe on the page with a frantic, desperate energy, pinpointed the exact location where the application of this frequency would be most devastating, the epicenter. She had drawn a map. Elara stared at the ghost's ancient map, then at the modern satellite data on her screen. The location Lyra had marked as the epicenter, the point of catastrophic failure, was no longer an empty desert. It was the site of the Tarim Basin Geothermal Energy Project, a new multi-billion-dollar power plant, hailed as a miracle of green energy, and its primary method of energy extraction, a method praised for its efficiency, was deep earth drilling, using high-frequency, ultrasonic resonance. The truth hit her with the force of a physical impact. The hacker, the attack on the archive. It wasn't about burying the past. It was about protecting the future. The corporation behind the energy project knew. They knew about the fault line. They knew about the risk. They had somehow accessed the same research, perhaps even another, lesser-known relic of Lyra's people. They knew they were building their green energy utopia on a geological time bomb, and they were willing to do anything, even destroy a priceless artifact and its researcher, to keep that secret buried. She looked back at the Codex, at the final, terrifying lines of Lyra's prophecy. They did not listen. The living language seemed to whisper to her from across the centuries. Our leaders chose to enter the long silence, rather than risk this knowledge falling into the wrong hands. But I believe a warning is more powerful than a secret. The dissonance is not just a possibility, it is a cycle, and the children of the New World are now striking the same terrible chord. You are the listener, and now you are the watcher. You must make them hear the silence before it is too late. Elara was now trapped. She was a fugitive, in possession of a ghost's prophecy that predicted an imminent, man-made disaster. She held the proof, written in a language that no one else in the world could read. She was a Cassandra, a prophet of a doom that only she and a 1,500-year-old ghost could understand. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the people she had to convince were the same people who had just tried to erase her. Chapter 4. The Cassandra's Gambit, the ghost's prophecy had transformed Elara's life from an academic puzzle into a high-stakes thriller. She was now the sole guardian of a warning that carried the weight of a potential geological catastrophe. Lyra's final, desperate plea, "You must make them hear," the silence had become her personal mantra, a sacred and terrifying mission. But how do you make a world that is deafened by the roar of progress and profit listen to the whisper of a 1,500-year-old ghost? Her first attempts were logical, rational, and doomed to fail, using encrypted communication lines. She anonymously sent her initial findings, the linguistic breakthrough, the translation of the prophecy, and a stark warning about the geothermal plant, to a handful of trusted academic colleagues and independent geological surveyors. She hoped to create a groundswell of scientific inquiry that the corporation, Unitech Energy, could not ignore. The response was a crushing, uniform silence. To her peers, her claims, stripped of the supernatural context she dared not mention, sounded like the ravings of a brilliant mind that had finally snapped under the pressure of an unsolvable problem. She was not met with debate. She was met with pity and professional ostracism. Her second attempt was more direct. She compiled a complete, detailed dossier, including the satellite imagery overlaid with Lyra's map and a scientific breakdown of the resonant frequency risk, and sent it to a renowned investigative journalist known for taking on powerful corporations. 3 days later, the journalist's editor contacted her through a secure channel. The message was brief and chilling. The journalist had been suspended, his research confiscated, after a single phone call from Unitech's legal department to the newspaper's board of directors. Unitech wasn't just powerful. They were omnipresent. They had ears everywhere. They were not just silencing the story. They were silencing the storytellers. The walls were closing in. Elara was now not just a Cassandra, a prophet fated to be ignored. She was a target. She knew Unitech would not stop with a legal threat. They had tried to destroy the Codex once. Now, they would try to acquire it and neutralize its reader permanently. She was living on borrowed time, a fugitive from a corporation that had the power to erase people as easily as it erased inconvenient truths. During this time of intense isolation and fear, her connection with the ghost of Lyra deepened. The Codex became her only confidant. The haunting was no longer about teaching her the language. It was now about providing strategic and emotional support. When Elara was near despair, the symbols on the page would shift, forming patterns that, in the contextual language, translated to concepts of patience and endurance. When she was analyzing Unitech's corporate structure, trying to find a weakness, the Codex would respond to the low hum of her computer, its text morphing to highlight ancient Weaver strategies for understanding a dissonant structure and finding the flaw in the weave. It was during one of these strange, collaborative sessions that she had her breakthrough. She was staring at a complex passage from the Codex that described the fundamental principles of the Weaver's acoustic science. It was a language, she now understood, that was not just descriptive, it was functional. It was a form of applied mathematics. The symbols were not just words. They were variables in a complex, multi-dimensional equation. And that's when she understood Lyra's final message. You are the listener. Now you are the watcher was not just a title. It was an instruction. She wasn't meant to just read the prophecy. She was meant to use the language itself. She had been trying to fight a 21st century corporation with a 5th century story. It was a fool's errand. The world didn't want to listen to her translation of the past, so she would have to use the ghost's language to show them a terrifying vision of their own future. The Codex was more than a history book. It was a predictive, analytical engine of almost supernatural power. Its contextual, environmental language was designed to model the complex, interconnected systems of the natural world. But what was a modern multinational corporation, if not a complex, man-made ecosystem? With its own inputs, outputs, and critical points of failure. Her new plan was terrifying in its audacity. She would stop trying to warn the world about the earthquake. Instead, she would use the ghost's living language to create a new kind of prophecy. She would build a predictive model, an algorithm based on the multidimensional, contextual logic of the Weaver's Codex. But she would not feed it geological data. She would feed it the one thing Unitech valued above all else, their own logistical, financial, and market data. She would use the ghost's ancient science to map the intricate weave of Unitech's global operations. And then, she would use that same science to show them exactly where and when a single, precise, dissonant event would cause their entire corporate empire to catastrophically collapse. She was going to stop trying to be a historian. She was going to become a prophet of a different kind, a prophet of corporate doom. The ghost had given her a warning about a geological disaster. Now, Elara Vance was about to weaponize that warning and aim it directly at the heart of the enemy. Chapter 5. The Weaver's Algorithm. **The final act of this story was not fought with warnings or protests. It was a silent, intellectual war, waged in the invisible realm of data and algorithms. Elara Vance, armed with the ghost of a dead language, was about to prove that a 1500-year-old mind could dismantle a 21st century corporate empire from beyond the grave. Her plan was not to expose their secret, but to make their secret irrelevant. She would not save the world by showing them the earthquake they were causing, but by showing them the corporate suicide they were committing. For 1 month, she worked, in a feverish, obsessive state that mirrored Lyra's own creation of the Codex. She did not sleep. She barely ate. She was in a constant, silent dialogue with the ghost. She used the Codex's multidimensional, contextual logic, its ability to understand how a small change in one variable can cause a cascade of failures in a complex system, as the foundational architecture for a new kind of predictive algorithm. She was not just translating the language. She was translating its very soul into the language of modern computing. She called it, simply, the Lyra algorithm. She fed the algorithm every piece of public and semi-public data she could find on Unitech energy, their supply chain logistics, their stock market dependencies, their political investments, their shipping routes, the weather patterns affecting their transport hubs. She was building a living, breathing, digital model of the corporation, a perfect mirror of its complex, interconnected anatomy. The result was staggering. The Lyra algorithm could predict the consequences of small disruptions with an accuracy that was almost supernatural. It could see the hidden connections, the invisible dependencies that no human analyst could ever hope to track. It was just as Lyra's language had been, a living map of its own context. And now, Elara prepared for her final move. She would not use the algorithm to predict a natural disaster. She would use it to create a corporate one. She identified a single, critical point of failure in Unitech's system. A single, non-essential component in their ultrasonic drilling heads was sourced from a single, obscure factory in a politically unstable region. The algorithm showed her that a minor, 2-week disruption at this one factory would trigger a catastrophic cascading supply chain failure, costing Unitech billions and delaying their geothermal project by at least a year. It was the corporate equivalent of Lyra's dissonant frequency, a single, precise strike that would shatter the entire structure. She did not hack the factory. She did not commit a crime. She simply made a single, anonymous phone call to an independent labor rights journalist, providing a tip backed by verifiable proof of severe safety violations at that specific factory. The journalist investigated, the story broke, and the factory was shut down by local regulators for an internal review for exactly 2 weeks. The collapse happened exactly as the ghost's algorithm had predicted. Unitech's stock price plummeted. Their project timelines were shattered. Their board of directors was in chaos, completely blindsided by a failure they could not understand. And in the midst of this corporate meltdown, their CEO received an anonymous, encrypted email. The email contained a single attachment. It was a detailed report, written by Elara, titled A Demonstration. The report did not mention the earthquake, the ghost, or the Codex. It simply, clinically, and mathematically detailed how the Lyra algorithm had predicted their current crisis, step by step. And it ended with a single, chilling offer. It stated that this was merely a demonstration of the algorithm's power. It then provided a second prediction, a detailed, terrifying, and utterly convincing model of the geological catastrophe their geothermal plant would trigger, complete with a precise timeline to failure and a projected death toll. The final line of the email read, "My model of your finances was correct. My model of the Earth is also correct. The next time I contact you, this report will be sent to every major news organization and insurance underwriter on the planet. You have 1 week to halt the project. The choice is yours." It was the most elegant checkmate in history. She had not proven her story was true. She had simply proven that her model was true, and she had used their own language, the language of profit and loss, of risk assessment to do it. To defy her now would be to bet their entire corporate existence against her terrifying, proven, predictive power. 2 days later, Unitech Energy released a public statement, citing unforeseen geological instabilities. They announced that the Tarim Basin geothermal project was being halted indefinitely. Elara returned the Codex to the archive. Its secret was safe. Its prophecy had been fulfilled. She never published the full story of Lyra. She knew the world was not ready for it. Instead, she published her algorithm, anonymously. She released the Lyra algorithm as an open-source platform, a tool for modeling complex systems, a gift to the world from a woman no one would ever know. The ghost of Lyra had finally found peace. Her civilization remained a secret, sleeping in the quiet earth. But her knowledge, her way of seeing the world, her living language, had been reborn. It was not just a memory. It was now a tool, actively working to bring a new kind of harmony and understanding to the dissonant world of the future. This has been the story of the Weaver's Codex, the tale of a linguist who discovered that a lost civilization's language was a living environmental supercomputer, haunted by the ghost of its last scribe, Lyra. When she uncovered a prophecy of a man-made disaster, she was silenced by a powerful corporation. Unable to win by telling the truth of the past, she used the ghost's own multidimensional logic to create a revolutionary predictive algorithm. She didn't warn the corporation about the earthquake that would destroy the region. She showed them the precise, mathematical formula for their own financial self-destruction. In doing so, she saved a secret and gave the world a new kind of knowledge, proving that the most profound wisdom is often found by listening to the ghosts that history has tried to silence. The past is not dead. It is a living language, speaking to us in whispers, in patterns, in the very air we breathe. Here at Crimson Tales, we believe the key to solving the problems of the future can often be found in the silenced voices of our ancestors. If you believe in listening to the warnings that history leaves behind, then join our investigation. A subscribe button animates on screen with a soft click sound. Subscribe to the channel and help us translate the secrets that are woven into the fabric of the world.